let me talk about these voucher programs that have actually been achieved. There are 29 voucher programs out there. Sounds like a lot. And there's a lot of cheerleading by voucher advocates. Look at all that we've achieved. Wow, 29 programs, fantastic. All of this is misleading. Almost all these programs are very small. The fact is, only 0.5% of American school kids go to private schools on vouchers. 0.5%. After 40 years of political struggle. Why? Well, there are two reasons for that. One is that the opponents have been really powerful and really successful at stifling vouchers. And the other is that Republicans have weak incentives, but they also haven't capitalized on these major opportunities that they've had. You know, there's this huge window for them to act, and they have not acted. Why? They don't want to. They don't say that, but that's what it is. Okay, so let's take a look at existing programs. There are 266,000 kids out there that use vouchers. 100,000 of those kids are in Florida. Okay, well, that means that 166,000 kids are in the other 49 states. Okay, Florida is the outlier here. The average voucher amount is $6,300 compared to the per pupil spending in the public sector of about $14,000. Do the math, right? So the vouchers are small. And that's very worrisome, right? If you have to have add-ons to afford tuition, well, that leads to obvious inequities. Also, small vouchers promote religious schools. You may or may not care about that, but it's a fact. All right, so of the 29, 3 are called town tuitioning programs. Maine and Vermont have had these programs since the late 1800s. The reason for it is that there are many small towns in those states that don't have public schools, or they don't have a high school, right? And so the state has said, look, we'll pay for you to go to school somewhere else in another town or whatever. You can go public or you can go private. The fact is most of these kids go to another public school. Okay, so I just sort of pushed these to the side. They're very different. So let's take a look at the other 26. Of those, all of them are for low-income kids, for special education kids, or for kids in low-performing public schools. There's not one universal voucher program of the type that Milton Friedman would like to see. Now, to break that down further, 12 of these 26 programs are special ed programs. 13 are low-income programs, and 1 is for kids in failing public schools. So, a few now include higher income levels, and these programs are growing, and that seems to be a trend. I'm going to talk about this later. So here is a list of the 5 largest programs in the country. Sorry, things aren't labeled, but I'm in the primitive range here. I didn't know how to do that. So the first figure there is the number of kids in the program. The percentage is really a ratio of the number of kids having vouchers over the number of kids who are in the public schools. And the last figure is the year the program was initiated. What you can see is that, except for Milwaukee, that figure actually for Milwaukee should be 37%, not 30%. All of these enroll a very small percentage of the kids in the state, and these are the biggest programs out there. Also, these 5 programs out of the 26 enroll 75% of the voucher kids in the whole country. So when people jump up and down and say, hey, we have 29 programs, well, most of the kids are right here in these 5 programs. Okay, so now let me talk for a second about the rules. What do the rules look like? Well, let me give you an example by comparing Milwaukee and Indiana. Okay, income eligibility. Who qualifies for a voucher? Milwaukee started out at 175% of the federal poverty level. You had to be below that to get a voucher. That's been raised to 300% of the poverty level, which amounts to about $83,000 a year for a family of 4. Indiana started out as a low-income program, 150% of the free and reduced price lunch federal level, which is higher than the poverty level, and has raised it to 300%. And that equates to $154,000 a year for a family of 4, almost twice as much. So the income level for vouchers is much higher in Indiana. Something like 80% of the families in Indiana now qualify for vouchers. Okay, and I would say that that's going to lead to a lot of inequities. Tuition. In Milwaukee, the voucher has to be accepted as full payment for tuition. In Indiana, no such requirement. If the voucher's not enough, you got to add on. Okay, if you're low income and you can't add on, too bad for you. Admissions. In Milwaukee, voucher students must be admitted. And if there's an oversubscription, it has to be a lottery. In Indiana, schools can select their own students. So if voucher students applied, they can be rejected. They can pick and choose among the voucher students. Obviously, there will be a lot of voucher students, kids who are poor or in other ways disadvantaged. They might find that they can't get in anywhere. Okay, religion. In Milwaukee, students can opt out of a school's religious program. In Indiana, there is no such rule. Testing. Both states require testing. Audits. In Milwaukee, schools have to have an annual audit by a CPA. Indiana, no such requirement. Okay, so Milwaukee is a system that's clearly regulated to promote equity and transparency. Indiana started out as a low-income program, but it's moved away from that. It's getting close to a universal program with very few rules for schools aside from testing and curriculum. And I think that this is a trend, or at least it appears to be, in red states toward bigger statewide programs, higher income limits, and schools that can select their own kids. I think there are a lot of inequities built into that, and I think the designers didn't care. So, they have other values, let's put it that way. Okay, so sitting back from all this and just thinking about the fact that, all these programs started out as low-income programs or special ed programs, what's going on? I mean, why were Republicans doing that? These are not their constituents. Well, I think the way to look at it is, what are they supposed to do? They believe in vouchers, they want to spread vouchers, and they cannot really launch big-time universal programs because their own constituents would give them tremendous blowback for something like that. So the place to start, a reasonable place to start, is with disadvantaged kids, even though they are not Republicans' constituents, right? These are the neediest kids in the country. Many of them are trapped in bad schools, and by instituting vouchers for them, it is a reasonable first step, a foot in the door for introducing vouchers and getting people familiar with vouchers and how they work, and then possibly expanding these programs later on. But I think that something else might be going on as well. And that something else is that the Republicans themselves have changed. Republicans have become much more ideologically extreme, especially since about 2010, since the rise of the Tea Party movement. And ideological purity and extremism has, I think, become much more important within Republican policymaking circles. And so it may well be that Republicans now are paying, or say, giving weight to ideology much more now than they have in the past, and overlooking some of the constituent preferences by parents who want to protect the public system, at least to some extent. And so I think that may account for the rise of these statewide programs with fewer rules and higher income limits. And so the question now is where all this is going. Remember, only 1/2% of the kids are going to school on vouchers right now. So it's not like, you know, they're doing revolutionary things. They're not. But in the future, maybe they will. Okay, so what's the evidence on the impact of vouchers? Okay, there's a reasonable amount of research on this. And, you know, given the reform environment in general, which was started to promote academic achievement, you know, there's just been a lot of research focused on that. So first, I want to start with the research that's been done on parents. I'll just summarize it. Voucher parents are more satisfied with their public schools than with the public schools they left. And by comparison to public school parents, they like what they're getting in these private schools. But an interesting question is, what are they getting? And I think while a lot of people think, oh, you know, these parents are all about choosing the best schools based on academic achievement, that is not true. I think there are a lot of sort of economic theorists out there who just automatically assume that. You know, they're going to seek out the best schools. Well, there was just a survey carried out by Ed Choice, a voucher advocate organization, in 2021. And what that survey showed is they're going to ask parents, what are your top 3 reasons for sending your child to a private school? And 19% listed academic achievement as number 1. And 65% didn't even list academic achievement. Okay, so what kinds of things are they thinking about? Safety, proximity, discipline, moral values, religion, those kinds of things. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that we need to know, you know, what these parents are really seeking out in the private sector. Here's another thing to consider. You know, charter schools have been, I think, better studied than voucher schools have. And the charter school studies, you know, Mackie Raymond here at Hoover has carried out a number of really high-quality studies. And what those and other studies show is that, you know, there are a lot of bad charter schools out there. There are a lot of good ones, and I think on average, the performance data on charter schools is good. But there are a lot of bad charter schools in the mix. And the thing is, parents keep going there. So the idea that, oh, you know, you have competition, and what's going to happen is that the good schools are going to thrive, and the bad schools are going to go out of business. The problem is the bad schools don't go out of business because parents are willing to send their kids there, because parents value other things. Okay, so this is a real issue if you're trying to promote a high-quality population of schools, right? One way to get around that is to measure the quality of those schools, and if they come up looking bad, kick them out, right? But then that's a government involvement thing. Okay, so that's the parent part. Student achievement, this has far and away been the focus of the research literature. I should say that none of this takes into account the design of the systems. You know, the point that I make again and again and again is that A choice system is about choice and competition, and that's what everybody focuses on 100% of the time. But there's the design of the system, and the design of the system shapes the way the system works. Different designs will lead to different kinds of performance. No one takes that into account. Nobody explores it. There's no literature on that. It's not like we're studying vouchers, and that's it. Are vouchers better than the public schools or not? So that's what the research literature looks like. And so the question is, do voucher kids learn more? And if you look at some of these advocacy websites, what they'll tell you is, absolutely, voucher kids learn more. But there's a lot of cherry picking going on here. And I think you need to be careful where you get your information. My own view is that you should turn to articles on this subject in peer-reviewed journals that are recent. And the authors of those articles will, whatever they're studying, if they're studying, Louisiana or Indiana or whatever, they will review the literature. And they will give you a much more objective appraisal of the literature than any advocacy group will. That's the way to do it. And so if you do that, what you find is the findings on achievement are very mixed. Sometimes they're positive, sometimes they're negative, sometimes they're null. The impacts also can vary by grade level, by subgroup, white, black, Hispanic, and over time. But a few things stand out. One is that minorities tend to have more positive impacts than whites do. The impacts are also more positive for the city programs, Milwaukee, Cleveland, and Washington, D.C., than they are for the statewide programs, Ohio, Louisiana, Indiana, and interestingly and unfortunately, the findings on those programs are that vouchers have negative impacts on how much students learn. Okay, so the big question is, what's going on here? And I think the only solution is for more research. We just need to delve into this and find out, why are those programs getting negative outcomes, the others didn't? And we need to find out why, and I think a lot of it has to do with the design of those programs. But we don't know because nobody studies design. So eventually we'll find these things out. Now, here's another subject. How do vouchers affect graduation from high school and college attendance? The literature there is very positive and consistently positive. Vouchers have a positive effect on these things. It's very important. Now, here's an interesting one. What's the impact of a voucher system on the public school system? The critics always say, oh my God, the voucher system is going to take all the best students, and it's going to take money out of the public system, and all the struggling students are going to be left in the public system. It's going to make achievement go down in the public system. It turns out that exactly the opposite is true, that competition from the voucher system causes the public system to respond in a very positive way. And actually, when there's a voucher system, the public system has to compete with, achievement in the public system goes up. And this has been documented again and again. I think the pioneer in this research was Caroline Huxby, who will be talking next here at Hoover. But a number of other people have done similar studies later on. This is the big wrap-up. I don't really have a whole lot to say at this point, but let me sort of backtrack and give you a sense of things. So let me just make a few basic points. One is that I think that people think about voucher systems in the wrong way. They always emphasize that it's about free markets and it's about choice and it's about competition and so on, and they ignore that these are really governmental systems that are designed to use the real power of choice and competition to social advantage, and they do it in different ways by the rules they adopt to structure the system. And the rules are just as important as choice and competition, right? The two go together. It's that combination that produces the outcomes that we see. And that's the way voucher systems should be thought of. Okay, now what about the voucher systems that are out there now? Okay, it's important not to sugarcoat this, and certainly not to point to the 29 voucher programs that are out there, because most of them don't amount to anything. It's been 40 years. 0.5% is nothing to brag about after all this time. What it looks like is failure. You know, you got to call it what it is. Now, this may be changing because Republicans are dedicated to promoting vouchers. And they've been very active over the last 10 years. But that 0.5% is a very recent statistic, right? So despite all their activity, they haven't gone very far. And the question is, are they going to go further? And what I would say is that unless they just ignore their constituency, they're going to get tremendous blowback as soon as they start threatening the public system, because Americans are wedded to the public schools. You know, there are disadvantaged families who don't like their public schools, who are getting bad educations. They're really getting the shaft in those schools. They're trapped. They want options. But most American families are not like that. They like the public schools. They treasure them. They want them protected. And Republicans are up against that. So I think looking toward the future, what's likely to happen is that vouchers will increase to some extent. More kids will wind up in the private sector, but the public sector will remain big and sort of intractable, well-established, well-protected, and that's not going to change. So there's really nothing wrong with that. I think the one danger going forward, from my standpoint, is that ideology will trump constituency, which means that it's trumping, if you'll excuse the expression, it's trumping the way ordinary people feel about these things. And if the ideological purists win out, what may well happen is that we may wind up with pretty big voucher programs that are pretty much free market programs that are very inequitable and are adopted simply because these people favor free markets. And they're going to let private schools do whatever they want, teach whatever they want, admit whatever kids they want, and let parents add on to the vouchers, and let low-income people fend for themselves. And if that's the way vouchers go, I think this is, personally, I think this is a real problem. There are some people who don't think it's a real problem. I think the bottom line is that, different strokes for different folks. I mean, different people have different values. Communities and states have different values. And you can expect a voucher program in Mississippi to look different from a voucher program in New York if New York ever were to adopt one, right? Very different values at work. So anyway, I hope that you have sort of a more variegated view of vouchers now and some of the tools to think about voucher systems. I'll take your questions. Thank you very much.